and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. Today, I would like to present a video that's a bit different from what I normally do. Usually it's me narrating a video talking about a case, but I'm going to lend the mic to somebody else today. Somebody who's a personal friend of mine, a family friend, who has a lot of experience in understanding the inner workings of fursuits. For people who are kind of internet savvy, you kind of know what I mean, but for those who don't, there's, of course, many multiplicities of subsets of cultures on the internet. And one of them is what's commonly referred to as people who are furries, who are interested in the visual design and the concept of anthropomorphic characters, which in it by itself is obviously nothing all that strange. I mean, if you look at old Disney films and things like that, even today, I mean, it's everywhere. It's a very deeply rooted image in fictional media. Now, of course, that being said, there are subsects of this own a subsect of culture that are looked down upon for their interests, and some because their interests go to certain degrees that are, we'll say they're more for the true crime podcasts. But this is not a person like that. This is somebody who has a genuine artistic interest in the anthropomorphic character build and how you can convincingly make an anthropomorphic costume. And some of you may see where this is going, especially based on the title. This is somebody who I felt I wanted to talk to about the plausibility that the Patterson-Gimlin film features somebody wearing an ape suit. The Patterson-Gimlin film having been filmed in 1967 over in Bluff Creek, California, by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. Bob Gimlin still being alive, though he's in his 90s. These two people claim to have recorded the first footage of a Sasquatch out in Bluff Creek, specifically a female Sasquatch, which many people in cryptozoology refer to just sort of nomenclaturally as Patty. So this is a discussion on the evidence for and against the idea that Patty's not a real animal, but is instead a person in a costume, which of course is what most people default to. There's a lot of interesting discussion to be had with this, and I think that considering how well this person knows the inner workings of these costumes, this is somebody who can identify what kind of system would need to be used for a costume just by looking at it on the outright, what kinds of materials were used to make it, etc., etc. So I figured, in terms of who is at my fingertips, who else better to ask than this person? So I hope you all enjoy the video and get something out of it, and I will allow her to take the mic now.
My name is Fraser. I am a graphic designer, or was graphic designer, illustrator, and costume enthusiast. I also did dabble in puppet making a couple of years back. I have since not been doing it as often just with my current work schedule. I'm here to talk about the likelihood of the 1967 Bigfoot film and how likely Patty is to be a costume.
Okay. So, what is your experience in looking at costumes, like, you know, these kind of, like, furry costumes and things like that?
I'm currently a furry. I have two fursuits, one retired fursuit head that I no longer wear. I was involved in the design process and involved in the process of making said suit, including checking over the foam builds and making sure everything was built to my specifications. I did a lot of research on how to do cosmetic makeup and how to build body shapes with foam, polyfoam, latex foam, just as a also retired cosplayer.
Sure. So you would say that you're really well versed in. Because you mentioned, like, making dimensions, custom dimensions, so
yes.
you're well versed in taking those resources and those materials and really designing them for specific people.
Yes, it comes with not only 3D, like in the realm of making 3D shapes, but also how 3D shapes would work on paper. So, like, two-dimensional shapes, as I mentioned, I'm an illustrator, so I have to build basically characters with simple shapes to make a fully complex shape.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're even involved from a simplistic version of the process to when it becomes more complicated at the end, more detailed.
Precisely.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I sent you, obviously, a few versions of the footage.
Yes.
Some of the original footage, as well as upscaled, stabilized footage, some important screenshots. We even talked about some today. Take me in whatever order you think would be best, whether that's the order your notes are in, or just in order of kind of what your thought process was looking into it. Tell me about your experience in looking at this film.
So, when I initially looked at the film, I looked at the extended film first, just because there was, probably going to be some details that I didn't know as someone who used to follow a lot of cryptozoology back in the day, obviously getting back into it with you. But I looked at that, and it was very interesting to look at, as for just the way people reacted on screen and how long the footage actually was, because most people only see that 30-second clip of the like super close-up, but seeing it from start to finish where the model actually stands up for the first time and just the way she glides across the screen, it gives me a lot of perspective onto what likelihood of this being an actual costume or an actual animal.
What were some of the first things that you noticed that were of interest to you as a costume designer?
So, my first thing was mobility. So, for people who don't know, it is sometimes very hard to move in a big furry costume like that. You don't have visibility. Most likely you're going to have something cover your feet if you have a full get-up on. Some people wear sneakers, some people don't. But that looked like either foot paws or like just something bulky that would be over the foot. Over, what'd you say, a riverbed was?
Yeah, like a dry creek bed.
Creek bed. It's going to be slippery, it's going to have rocks, and it's going to have bumps. Without somebody watching you or without yelling commands, you're not going to see where you're going. You're not going to have the best, like, you'd have to be looking down the whole time to even avoid rocks. I know personally when I perform, my sister will be there with me. It's called a handler. They make sure you don't hurt yourself, you don't trip up steps. If you're doing this outside in the woods, you're gonna need someone to tell you where all those rocks are. And from what I saw, I know there's no audio, but it didn't look like anyone was giving directions. The creature was looking back towards them, they were looking in front of them, they were not focused on the ground, which is something that is, especially with, from what I could gather from the eye holes, or the, is there a way to...
yeah, if you go to the,
I can just,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so when I look here at the eyes, or where, like, that would be part of the face, that's small. Like, if they were cutouts, even, that would be, like if they were, like, just cutout circles, still would be pretty difficult to see, but if they were the way that realistic heads for, like, costumes and masks were used, they would only have a little nickel-sized hole to see out of, which is hard to do, and without help.
Sure, okay.
It's doable, it's just difficult.
At the time, how difficult would it have been?
Oh, for something in the 1960s? Yeah, it would have been pretty, like, anyone can make a hole, but to hide that hole successfully, even, I know this is just on a small camera, but, it would have been pretty difficult, and the way, just, like I said, the way the subject moves across the screen, that there's no hindrance. There's no, resistance from, like, they're not, like, creeping around on the ground, they're not looking specifically, it's like they're just going forward. It's, like, it's a glide, it's basically gliding. Which would bring me to the foot itself, whereas most people, as we were looking earlier, for human models, if they using prosthetics, they would use foam latex, and to give it a more of a realistic feel. It's a bit floppy, but you wouldn't be able to walk with it. It's like, especially because your foot's still under there, it's gonna hurt. But also, if they were using a slipper or shoe, this was a recast, you told me.
Yes, that was a copy of the cast.
Oh, if you notice here, it's very, like, it's large, but it's narrow. So if you were to take the way for fursuiting specifically, the way that a foot cast would be made is you would take the person's shoes and you would build with something called polyfoam or upholstery foam sometimes around the shoe, and it would make it bigger, give it it would give it the illusion of it having a paw, being a large foot. For this, the person would have to have either a pretty big foot in general, like a large, or it would have to be like a person with regular sized feet and then made with foam around it. It would not be this slender. Mm-hmm. It would be more like, this is just a slipper, this is a cheap slipper, it wouldn't be, this is not a hard bottomed foot pattern, but it would be kind of like this, very bulky, not as slender, and if you'll notice here, the digits are individualized. Now mine's just a cheap slipper, but this is not easy to pull off with polyfoam. There would not be any weight to the front unless that person had very big feet, which is possible, but if it was, you would have to be barefoot under the shoe to get that indent then. Mm-hmm. So if the individual toes would not be seen if they had a shoe, and if it did have a shoe, if it did not have a shoe, that person would not be able to walk as easily.
Sure.
It would probably have slipped. There is a slope I did see at the tail end of the video where the creature kind of makes its way up. You'd have to have some grip strength, which you would not get through a costume. Like, you'd have to use your toes or a hiking boot. So the only thing I would point out specifically is this wrinkle right here. That could be very loose skin. That's possible, but that is like a crease in a fabric, which if this was a form-fitting suit you wouldn't see, or if it was poorly made, which is possible, mm-hmm. because suits like these were very expensive to make. They're expensive now, and they were also back in the day kind of expensive. Especially if they had a cheap suit done, it would have been cheaper, but you would have seen this crease way more often.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In talking about like what suits would have looked like at the time, I know you have a lot of notes about like what the resources would have been at the time that would have been at Roger's disposal and things like that. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yes, I can. So most suits, filmmaking is a very interesting thing in costume designing, is that it has not changed much. Most of the techniques are still around today. The main thing people use for making costumes, puppets, is something called polyfoam, which is used for blocking out larger creatures. So that was made in 1929, I believe, maybe a little earlier, 1920s. And foam latex, which is used for face prosthetics, which was made, I believe, around also 1920s, could have been 1940s. I did not write the date down, but very early on. And most of those things have not changed in filmmaking. So for the price of faux fur today, for the size of the subject was about 6 to 6.5 feet tall. Mm-hmm. You would only need about 4 yards of fur, 36 inches per yard, and today that costs $26.99 per yard. So it's would only be like, let's see here. It would for all that, for just the fur, it would have been $107.96. Mm-hmm. Not expensive. Not super expensive, not out of the ordinary. The prosthetics is where it's going to get you. Because not only are you worrying about the face here, you're also worrying about that chest, which would not have, the way it was moving in the video could not have been done with polyfoam. It was too...
So why not?
Because they kind of they have swing to them. I've noticed that. Polyfoam is rigid. It's squishy. It's malleable. But it just does not flow to the body very well. Okay. So, back to the foot thing, if it would it wouldn't have been able to bend to get enough grip to climb up that slope.
Sure. Okay.
So that would have been the same for the breast, that you would have to use foam latex or silicone, which I'm not sure I don't believe was very widely used back then either.
Sure.
But nowadays it's more common, but...
Do you think back then it would have been available to somebody, realistically been available, let's say financially, to someone like Roger, who I mean was like taking loans for bills? at that point in his life.
So I would not have spent money on that because today, the money for prosthetics like that the foam latex range from $59 to $120, and that is per piece. That's per jaw, that's per cheek, that's per breast.
So he could be spending upwards of $1,000.
Yes, he could.
Or more.
Yeah, so to make it himself, I did run the number on that. Back then, for all of this, to put it together, would have been $170.30. That is $1,560 in today's money. So it would have been over $1,000 just to make it himself.
And do you think, let's say offhandedly, that let's say Roger didn't have the skill to put that together or the resources, would paying somebody to do that be even more money because of labor cost? Okay.
Definitely. So I ran that. Too. For, let's see. Now, I ran it from the cheapest to expensive. And if he found a very amateur person to make this suit, it would have cost about the same if he had done it.
Someone with very low labor cost.
Yeah, someone who's just starting out, maybe they're doing it at a discount point.
Sure.
But if he wanted something like movie quality, it would have been $5,600.
Would you say this would have been movie quality at the time?
Yeah, as we were talking about before, we were talking about the King Kong costumes. Today those look atrocious. Back then that would have been that's pretty decently made. Again, with the shakiness of and the blurriness, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, but the way the body moved, the flow, there was no ripping of seams that you could see. There was no, anything coming undone, because most of this stuff, there's at least something to show that this is a dead giveaway, that this is not, that this is a costume and not
right.
Like that crease, that's the only thing I could really see that would be indicative of it potentially being a costume. But most of it, just the flexibility and the fact that the arms are longer than they go down to the knees, that's a giveaway that it could be a different animal, because humans, for reference, our arm lengths, ours only go down to about our hips. Of course, that varies from person to person. If you wanted to go back to your knees, you have to build it with something called armature wire, which is cheap, but you'd have to have the knowledge to do that.
Do you think her arms look like they have that installed in them, or do they move like how you would expect?
So it does swing like a normal human's, but from how early this footage is, the articulation of the elbows is too good.
Okay. Can you open up the rightmost tab real quick?
This one right here?
Yeah. Can you, as somebody who designs costumes for custom dimensions and things like that, can you give us some of your thoughts on the proportions of Patty compared to Roger?
So this is to scale, right?
This is roughly to scale. Okay, yeah, it might be like an inch off or so, but it's Roger's height of 5'3", and then Patty's maximum height of 6'5".
Okay. So first thing I want to say, was he the one recording?
He was the one recording.
Okay. So it wouldn't have been him in the suit.
Right. The idea is that it would have had to have been a third man.
Yes, there would have had to be a third person who. Now, let's just say the person, if they were just going bare bones, no extra padding or anything, no muscle padding, which is not so common in something like that, because that would be more money to add more polyfoam.
Sure. So on top of the potentially $5,000, you'd have to pay for more padding.
Yeah.
Do you think a suit like this, to produce this image, would have needed padding? For the common person, let's say.
For the common person, if this was just some random dude they pulled off the street who was 6'5", maybe.
Okay.
Because if you see, everything is pretty thick up in the stomach area. So I would have said, if the guy was relatively skinny or not as built, then yes, they would probably have to fill him out a bit. They would have to add more foam.
Sure.
And they would have to make that fit to the body, and it would probably be sewn into the costume itself, which is possible. It's doable. But yeah, that's just an extra cost. And if you see the contour here, they would have had to add butt padding and thigh padding.
Yeah, those are huge thighs.
That's some guys have thick thighs. I will say that, but just finding his like if they just found some random dude, like they would have to tailor it to him. And that takes time, that takes money. The dude probably would have been there for a long time, like getting suited up. It's not a quick process. They would have had someone help him, and they would have had to guide him across this riverbed. Like he would have had to walk it like 100 times to do it as smooth as.
Okay, right.
Which I from the reaction I saw like during the extended version, that was like a genuine visceral reaction. Like he fell off his horse and was shaking the camera and all that. That's seems like a genuine reaction, not like, okay, I've rehearsed this 100 times, let's just go.
Right. What more can you tell us about what you see on Patty?
Scientifically, women compared to men, not that tall. Like, yeah, obviously there's some like leeway. Like they could have found a 6'5" woman to do this. They could have paid her to like, dress up in basically a gorilla costume and walk up a creek. But that being said, the boob would not be as defined if they did, and that would not be made out of polyfoam either, as I mentioned, because it would be very, very rigid, and it would not have as much flop. It would have to be made out of either foam latex or silicone to get that effect, to get that squish, to get that droop. For the way it moved with her body, it did not seem like that. Like they could have done that to a male subject too, and like again, that would have been extra to put it on. Which if you're just trying to get a shot of like a guy in the like a monkey in the distance, they wouldn't have put much effort into that. Like, because they're just trying to get rich, and they're just trying to get this shot of like some hairy dude in the woods. They wouldn't have put effort into the details such as that.
Which you mentioned that if Roger was a clever enough guy, he could have thought of that, but his resources at the time are so limited.
If he had limited resources, he would have to do this all himself, and I don't know if he was a crafty guy like that, and he could like make all this stuff himself. If he was a tailor, maybe. Like I know people who can sew and do all this foam casting and all this stuff. Like that's just part of a bigger industry. But if he was just this guy, he was a retired rodeo star, right?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, so stereotypically, I don't think he would have been able to do that. Like, that just doesn't seem likely to me. But, yeah, he would have had to have someone who knew about it, someone who, like, would know how to sew, know how to cast things, or have the money to do so. And, convince someone to walk across that riverbed 100 times before they got the proper fluidity.
Interesting. We mentioned the shockwave that seems to travel up her thigh when she steps. Can you tell me about the potential muscle movement similar to that you see in this and what that might mean?
Okay. So if you've ever seen a cat run, you can kind of see their muscles working like that. That is very hard to fake. Like, you would have to have technology from today to make that happen back then, which does not seem likely. Like, potentially it could be done with armature wire, but I think you would notice it, and there would also be an extra something for the puppeteer to control, because with armature wire, you can use it to make effects with the face, but it's controlled by the puppeteer's hands, so they would have to focus on like pulling something, the right thing at the right time to make that ripple happen up the leg. That would, either the guy would be really good at like just performance acting in general, or like just it's muscle, it's actual muscle, and it would have to be a form-fitting costume, which is not easy to make.
Right, and if it was form-fitting, obviously this guy's proportions are like insane. If that's
yeah, it would be very like if it was form-fitting, this would be pretty. Like, this would be a boobs.
Right.
A dude, or a woman. It could have been a woman in the costume. If there was a costume involved, we don't know. But then again, it would still be like insane, like to see underneath the fabric, because it's not just fake fur. You actually have a liner on the back of that fur. So see, she's very furry, very fluffy. This is luxury shag fur, which is what I'm theorizing is the similar type of fur used on Patty over there, if there was fur used. It's very common nowadays. It was also common back then. there is a backing to this. This is not just fur stitched together. There is a, if you want to take a feel, Carrick, it's actually pretty rough and coarse.
It's like a mesh almost, yeah.
It is pretty much like a mesh. I also brought the paw in. So,
oh, the one that actually goes in the hand. Okay.
Yeah, so, little different, but...
It's interesting.
So, digits are not very flexible because it is foam and padded and stuffed.
Right.
Which would not be the case for Patty over there because it's ape-like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there would just probably be, like, a thin glove or something if you were looking at. But, as you can see, I'm moving my wrist. You can see the big motion on my hand. You can't see anything.
Right.
You cannot see muscle movement. You can't see anything right there. Yeah, if this was covering my entire chest, I would have to, one of the performance tips that we use is go big with your movements. So they can see your expression, they can see your intention. I don't believe that whoever was in this, or the subject, was given any instruction with that. That muscle ripple seemed pretty unintentional. Mm-hmm. Which, yeah, you know, that if it was just loose fur over a model, the person would have to be very jacked to make that happen.
I was gonna note too, on that same leg, where the back of the leg connects to the knee,
right here,
you have that like crease there. Is that something indicative of a costume to you, or does that look like real muscle and like ligaments working there?
That's actually difficult for me to answer because I would say either or could be argued for. For Patty here, in use of modern terms, would be referred to as a plantigrade suit, which is straight leg. That's used for bears, monkeys, and I believe bears, monkeys, red pandas, pretty much anything with a straight leg like a human would have. Digigrade is curved and muscle, which have to be made with more padding. So, for when people make full costumes like that, if they're just doing plantigrade, they don't really use extra for the legs. So, it would still be hard to tell. Like, again, you'd have to be very muscular to see the ripple. On a bend of the knee like that, it would probably be more visible if it was a costume.
Okay.
Just because that's just where the body will contort naturally. Mm-hmm. But on, like, a thigh or a calf, like, without any...
Not so much.
Not so
yeah.
much, no. Yeah,
okay.
like an elbow, you would definitely see something fold. Or
okay.
a knee, you would see something fold.
Aside from that one crease on her, do you see anything on her that looks to you like a fold or a zipper, maybe?
So, no. And it's actually funny that you mentioned zippers. Nowadays, side zippers are very popular because it just hides it better. Back then, I don't think that many people would have thought to do that. It would either be a front zipper or a back zipper.
Okay, right.
But asymmetrical zipper, that's just something I'm starting to see in the recent years.
Okay, gotcha.
And a leg would be weird to put that on anyway.
Mm-hmm. What else do you want to tell me about this? Because I know there's obviously like a lot to say.
There is a lot to say. We talked about motion. We talked about sight.
Talked about sight, yeah, which I think was a really interesting point. What do you think of how the hair looks?
So that's actually a good point. I actually didn't mention that. The hair is, here it's like dark gray, that's just the photo, but you would say it was brownish in the...
It looked like a dark, dull brown.
Okay, that's what I looked up for prices, just because, I just looked up on Big C Fabrics, and that's where I got my information from for modern yards of fur. So you had mentioned that a lot of people, their thing, it was that the fur would be uneven, and that's why it's a costume, like an amateur would have sewed it together. I actually would say that makes it more realistic, because if you... I'm going to pull Sorbet back up. This is pretty even. Now, what most people don't know is that the fur around the face is shaved. So the white fur that was used was shaved down to make it even. Every now and again there'll be like a little miss or like a wrinkle or a misshave, and it'll be too short or too long. But it's mostly uniform. And the back is not mostly uniform too, and that was just left long pile. The patchiness would actually be symbolized to just regular fur loss and regular just, you know, hey, I fell down this hill and now I have a missing patch of fur.
Sure, okay, so it's you would expect it from an organism that grows fur.
Yeah, and the fact that it would be in different lengths, if a fursuit loses fur, it doesn't come back. It's which happens. I left my brush here 2 weekends ago. That you saw there was loose pile fur stuck in it if you looked. Yeah, we use brushes, and the fursuit will just lose hair over time, which is which it just happens. Like, but it doesn't grow back. It's not going to be different. It'll be different lengths, but the more fur you lose over time, it's just not going to be patchy. It's just going to be short.
Sure.
But, actually, that is another point I wanted to bring up, is that, which I'm guessing people have asked, like, if it's a costume, where's the costume?
That's been asked a lot.
I can actually explain. So, I don't... growing up, Carrick, did you ever see the movie The Labyrinth or any Jim Henson type thing?
Yeah, I've seen some Jim Henson stuff.
Okay, so if you take a picture, if you looked at those costumes then, or the puppets then, they do not look the same as now, because polyfoam and foam latex, they degrade over time. They are they're sensitive to light, they're sensitive to heat. The more they're used, the human sweat, it makes it disappear. Same with fur and foam. It just... This is him. This is Hoggle from The Labyrinth today. This is what he looked like. This is what he is now. Now this is Jim Henson. This is the company that prides itself on making puppets that are realistic and fun, and the children spark imaginations. That's what happened after like 30 years after that movie came out. Bigfoot suit existed. It's just gone to the wind. Like because I'm guessing that they wouldn't know how to take care of that properly.
Sure, if it got stored in the attic somewhere, it would be
it's
dust
gone.
by now. Yeah,
it would be dust in the wind by now. This is what he looks like. Yeah, wow, he does not...
And again, that's like high quality material, that's the best in the market sort of thing.
Yeah, this is someone who knew what they were doing and knew how to properly take care of him, and even then, same with like fursuits today. They degrade over time. They'll give you a good 10 years if you properly take care of them, but after that, they're just unwearable. And like, if you don't know how to take care of them, then they're gone. Like, like you can get them remade, you can get them restored, or refurb as we call it, is just you know, like adding new foam, sometimes redoing certain parts just to give it as much use as possible. But human sweat and elements and anything, it just takes it out of it. Like, it sometimes just, if this is a one-time use, then yeah, but if it existed, it would just not exist anymore, or be completely unrecognizable.
Okay.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to mention and never did.
That's a good thing to mention, because that is a big question that comes up from both camps, I think.
Yeah,
you could phrase it either way, right? Like,
yeah, like either or, like, oh, you know, where's the costume, or where's it's now, and yeah, that would be.
It would be gone.
It would. It just
there is probably no suit to look for if there was. A suit.
If there was still a suit, it would just be moth-eaten, probably, and gross.
There's no getting that thing into a museum at some point.
Like in a museum, like I would just that Hoggle puppet I just showed, he was on display in the Jim Henson workshop.
Right.
And by people who knew what they were doing. And
that was 30 years of degradation there.
Like, you know, Labyrinth came out like the 1980s. And
sure, so up-to-date, more up-to-date materials, used by the highest buyers in the market, basically. Highest quality stuff, trained professionals, 30 years later, and it's already in shambles.
Yeah.
And this would be people who are trying to really innovate for their time.
Yep, these are the people, the best in the business. Jim Henson, like you saw Five Nights at Freddy's movie.
Yeah.
There is no question. Those puppets, those Five Nights at Freddy's puppets, 30 years, the next 10 years, they're probably not going to work anymore. They're gonna,
sure.
They're going to have to redo them at some point.
We're going on 53 years after the Patterson film was shot.
Yeah,
so this is a suit that does not exist anymore.
There's just no chance of it being around anymore. And, well, there is a chance, but it would not be recognizable.
Okay. What else do you want to tell me about your observations here?
Gimlin and Patterson, they were not costume designers.
No, neither of them were. Yeah.
So, to make... we call it advanced thinking, advanced concept thinking, is what would this creature look like from walking around in the woods so long? And they might have been smart men, or they might have been clever men, but I don't think if they weren't trained professionals, they wouldn't think about that. Like, they wouldn't think, oh, let's muddy up the fur, let's make this, like, dude that we found look like a woman. Or a woman.
I do want to ask you one thing, actually.
Yeah.
I forgot about this. There's a point that people made, because we saw this a little bit too when I was showing you the flexibility of the front foot.
Yes.
When she raises her feet, and you can see the back of them, which is how we know that this track matches what her feet actually looked like. They're kind of this off-white color, right? So she has this pale kind of skin to her.
Yeah.
And her feet don't look dirty.
Okay.
What do you make of that?
Okay.
Because it's the same color as the skin that's on her face and that you can see below her fur.
So, that would make me... Alright, so I can also say that would probably just be, like, just the quality of the footage because you couldn't see it that well. Mm-hmm. That might be it. But it could also be, it would be a specific type of, like, remember how I said silicone could be used to make some of that stuff? Again, I'm not sure if it was popularized back then. I don't believe it was. It's possible that they could have used that for a foot lining on the bottom, like a slicker bottom padding to that. And for silicone, it would just slip right off. It's, like, water resistant.
Okay, so that would have made it more difficult for him to walk.
Yes,
even.
exactly. That's my only thought. It could have just been that, you know, I mean, I don't know how often we look at monkeys' feet, but it could have just been that her skin is just
pale.
Yeah, just pale, and you know, if it's dirty, like I guess define dirty because you know you look at your dog's foot or your cat's foot, they walk around, they still kind of have like that. It still looks pink. It's not always muddy. Sure,
right. Well, that and the gravel of the creek is a light color.
Yeah, so it's possible it could have just been like just the texture of her, like her physical skin is just smooth in general, so it's either water resistant. Because if she's hanging around a creek bed, you know, humans hang around water all the time. It could have just washed off, or it could have just not. Well, like mud doesn't always stick to us. Sometimes it just comes off. We hit something hard enough, it puffs off of us. We can just rub it off because I don't know if you know about the macaques in Japan, but there's an island where...
Is this the ones that hang out in the hot springs and such?
No, I'm talking about the ones that learned how to wash sweet potatoes in the ocean.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, so, you know, monkeys, you know, we think of them as wild animals, they're also pretty smart. The story is one macaque saw a woman washing sweet potatoes in salt water to give them, like, and she followed suit and ate one of the sweet potatoes, realized it was salted, and then taught her whole monkey troop how to do it. And I don't remember which island in Japan it was, but now all of them do it. Like, it's just that island and all those monkeys.
It's a taught behavior.
Yeah, it's a learned behavior. So, theoretically, Patty here could have saw someone washing up in a river or swimming in a river, like as he did back in the day, and just started doing that. And just washing her feet. Or
yeah.
It's a possibility.
That's so interesting that you bring that up, because first off, they said that she was crouched when they first saw her.
Yes, and I did see that when I saw her stand up.
Yeah, so she rises up on her... Yeah, right. There's also another piece of footage, decades later, from the same site, which is crazy, of this, like, large black figure, and it looks as though it's sitting next to what is now a creek part that has a lot more water in it, and it's playing with debris in the water. So just an interesting, like...
That's interesting that you bring that up because playing is actually a sign of intelligence in species. Crows play, otters play. Anything that is not considered beneficial to survival is considered play. And, you know, they can learn that from other species. Like, crows... no, not crows. Ravens and wolves will actually play together. Like, the ravens will grab sticks and make the baby wolves chase them and throw them. It's adorable. If you haven't seen a video of it, please look it up. But, you know, that could have been a thing, like you know, the fact that if it was an adult, like a large black one, I don't know how big, like, again, we don't know enough to, like, theorize how big a baby is. But, you know, if they're playing, then that's just a sign of intelligence in an adult species, which is very intriguing.
Right. What are... Do you have any conclusive thoughts on this after looking into it for, I think, the better half of a week now?
Yeah, I've been looking into it for about a week. Yeah. No, we were talking this what, Sunday?
I want to say 4 days ago, 5 days ago,
so
something
about a
along
week.
Those lines. Yeah.
Okay. Learned a lot from looking at this, and just my background as someone who's worked with people with costumes and working with my own costumes, is that, you know, it's possible that this is real. It very is. Unfortunately, we don't have a costume to go off of because we don't, like, again, it'd be gone. Most of the stuff that you see, like the crease, is the only thing I would say that's a solid costume. a lot of this stuff you would have to be a very crafty individual, like crafty as in like good with crafts, not crafty as in smart. To make this work, you'd have to have some knowledge of the film industry, and I know a lot about the film industry because I just grew up with the internet. And,
Sure.
But people would have to go to the library to learn all this, which is free. They'd have to know where to get this stuff. They'd have to find professionals to cast prosthetics for them, or make them themselves, which is possible. Not exactly cost effective, but it could work. This is a very possible, real Bigfoot.
How, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it, do you think, that, disregarding what it means if the answer is that this is not a costume, like forget whatever that means,
Yeah.
right? Just on a costume-based analysis, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it, considering all the context that we have here, that this is a costume?
So 1 being like...
1 being like it's almost not a costume. Like 0 would be it can't be. 1 is like, in some crazy circumstance, maybe, sort of thing.
That's not a costume.
That it is a costume.
It is a costume.
And 10 would be it's totally a costume.
Alright. So let's say about a 3.
Okay, so low.
So low, it's just, there's a lot of factors going into this being, like, the fact that they made it look so much like a functional animal. In terms of calling it a costume, it's just not a thought process a lot of people would have had back in the day. I mean, they could have very well. It's a possibility, everything's possible, but just having, that muscle flex, that foot flexibility, being able to climb a slope, get through a muddy, dried out creek bed full of rocks, that's not easy. That's not small potatoes. That can't be filmed in a day without getting hurt. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying. Like, you're gonna trip, you're gonna fall. You probably don't have someone on standby to fix that unless they did it themselves. But, something rips, then your whole day's shot.
Right.
But that's my theory on that.
So, what are your personal thoughts coming out of this, then?
Personal thoughts, 1, costumers are expensive, dude. No, I'm kidding. It's just going on a deeper analysis and understanding not only how costumes work, but how people work and how animals in the wild work. It gives you a lot of perspective on what's possible in this world. And then, we live in a world where we don't even know our own ocean that well. So it's possible that on land, we haven't even just, scratched the surface in the forest of Maine. So anything is possible. This is possible. This could happen. This is real. They could be walking around next to us and we wouldn't even know. I'll also say there is a graphic about furries and Bigfoot sightings.
The strong correlation.
Yeah, there's a strong correlation. That's a possibility too. It could